I'm Chris Youett. I've been a journalist for 45 years, and I used to work on the independent Coventry Journal in the early 1970s.
On the 21st of November 1974, there was a series of bombs in Birmingham pubs, am I right?
There were two bombs that went off.
21 people were killed and 182 people injured. The context of this, of course, was the mainland bombing campaign by the Irish Republican Army, which is really, I suppose, the 1970s and 80s version and 90s version of a long struggle that there's been really for emancipation of the nationalist community in Ireland in the face of an army occupation in the north of Ireland.
Well, army occupation is one way of looking at it. If the army wasn't there, you'd probably have even more trouble. This is what I believe is the truth. There was an active provisional IRA cell that was being hunted by Special Branch. On the night in question, they actually planted 3 bombs, not 2. 2 went off. The third one at Selly Oak did not. But the third one was planted after most of the 6 had been arrested. Therefore, they couldn't have planted it. Right?
What about warnings? Because the IRA normally would give warnings. They didn't really want... They realised that there was a lot of bad propaganda or bad press they get from if they were to kill innocent people.
Well, the provisional... You must remember it's the provisional IRA, not the official. The provisional was a very professional organisation. They changed their structure from the old brigade to 4-man cells plus a quartermaster. The quartermaster went round to find telephone boxes to give the warning to. When the bombs were actually planted, both telephone boxes had been vandalised. So the quartermaster would go and find another one that was working before he could make his warning phone calls to the police and the Birmingham Post and Mail.
And they used to use recognised code names, didn't they?
That's correct, yes.
So what went wrong?
Well, first of all, the bombs weren't supposed to go off. Because the telephone boxes that have been identified for telephoning through the warnings have been vandalised, the warnings didn't get through until it was too late. The police then started looking at people who supported the Republican movement. Well, and that's the reason these 6 were arrested.
Hang on, because at the moment, you see what you've said originally, that the police special branch were already following a cell, so surely they should have arrested this cell.
Well, that's one of the great mysteries. The special branch were within 48 hours of arresting the 5 people actually responsible. The case was taken off them and given to the controversial Serious Crime Squad under Superintendent George Reade. The Serious Crime Squad were nicknamed the Lying Squad because of the number of people they'd fitted up.
Why were they fitting people up, Chris?
Because that's one of the great mysteries. We think they just wanted to get a good arrest rates for promotion purposes. But there were a hell of a lot of appeals as a result of convictions that they secured.
Okay, so West Midlands Police took over and arrested a lot of individuals they believed were responsible for these pub bombings.
These were people who supported the United Ireland, but they were not. But none of the people were no members of any of the paramilitaries.
And you said that the arrests took place after one of the bombs had planted. How can you prove that?
Well, the third bomb was planted after arrests had been made. Because the people were arrested they were going on the boat train to Holyhead, and they were arrested at Holyhead Station. So they couldn't get from Holyhead to Selly Oak in 5 minutes, could they?
So, I mean, there are millions of supporters of a united Ireland. How come these 6 individuals were arrested?
Well, probably because they'd been. I think it's because they'd made donations and they'd never made any secret of their views. But you see, if the Serious Crime Squad had read Special Branch's files, they'd have known who to arrest. They'd arrested the 5 people actually responsible.
So what's your theory about why the wrong people were arrested?
The formation of the West Midlands Police was not very popular with the rest of the West Midlands, apart from Birmingham. and they were desperate to prove that this reorganisation worked. That's why they... See, if you look at all the major miscarriages of justices, they're all down to the big, what's called the reorganised police forces, like West Midlands, South Wales, Greater Manchester.
I mean, the end result was that Six, now called the Birmingham Six, that's Hugh Callaghan, Patrick Joseph Hill, Gerard Hunter, Richard McIlkenny, William Power and John Walker all did 17 or 16 years in prison.
That's right.
They were given life sentences in 1975 for these bombings, and then in the Court of Appeal, the entire case was overturned and they were released in 1991. Now, this ended up being one of the greatest ever miscarriages of justice in Britain, particularly because there were so many people that were, I mean, some might say, fitted up, Chris. So can you just take us through, what you think it should be because obviously that's a long time, 17 years, where the wrong story has been peddled around as to who did it. What really happened?
Well, what really happened was that the four-man provisional IRA cell and quartermaster planted the bombs because they wanted, and the aim was that the authorities are going to be tipped off so that they didn't explode, right? It was obviously to put pressure on the British government to work for United Ireland.
I mean, do you mean that nobody was killed, or that the bombs didn't explode?
The bombs were never intended to go off because it was all timed so that the police would get there and the bomb disposal people would get there and disarm the bombs.
I mean, how that can take possibly hours to defuse a bomb. I mean, it's a very dangerous thing to do. Surely, hang on. Surely the IRA cell could, find another phone box within that amount of time, in order to give a warning, at least to make sure that the building was cleared.
Well, by the time they found a phone that worked, that hadn't been vandalised, it was too late because the warning got through, and then the bombs went off shortly afterwards.
Okay, so who should be still possibly brought to book, if anybody, for this?
Well, there's the 5 people involved, 3 of which are dead.
So do we know who they were?
The police do. All 5 were given letters of immunity from prosecution with the terms of the Good Friday Agreement.
I mean, how has this gone down amongst the families of the victims in Birmingham?
Well, a lot of the families, I don't think the families have been told about this.
So how come you know and they don't?
Well, because 3 days afterwards, at about 2:05, I was walking past Coventry's police station, and a group of coppers who were just knocking off duty knew I was a working journalist and called me over and told me the Serious Crime Squad had arrested the wrong people. And the suggestion was I should look for the 3rd bomb, because the 3rd bomb was planted after these people were in custody, so they couldn't have done it. Then, worst of all, the 5 people actually responsible flew out from Birmingham Airport on the morning of the 3rd day, dressed as businessmen. They then went to European airports that had direct Aer Lingus flights with the Republic, because obviously the Aer Lingus and the Irish government, the Republic's government, would never cooperate with the request for extradition on anything they regard as a political crime. Now, one of the cell was then rushed in front of the Provisional IRA Council, asked what the hell went wrong, because the bombs weren't supposed to go off, right? And incidentally, a lot of my information has actually come from coppers who were not listened to by the Serious Crime Squad or the top brass at the time.
Okay, so what was the reaction from the IRA Army Council to this disastrous operation?
Well, they played it low key. They obviously were never going to admit that it was a mistake, and they didn't. They never admitted that the police had got the wrong people.
Now,
they never said, well, we have the 5 people and that you're actually responsible and they're safe in the Irish Republic. They could have said that, you see, which they didn't.
I mean, it does sound very difficult to believe that the police would know who'd done it, Chris, and yet not arrest them.
Well, because the case was taken off Special Branch and given to the Serious Crime Squad. Now, if Special Branch had kept it, those people would have been arrested before they flew out the country.
Who did that and why?
Well, that's what nobody will ever find out. I actually interviewed the Chief Constable of the West Midlands, Sir Philip Knight, in May 1984, and I actually put him on the spot over this, and he wouldn't give an answer. All he would say was, I've read the evidence, and it's an overwhelming case.
What did he mean by that?
Well, he believed that he said the evidence was so good that the convictions would never be overturned on appeal.
Which they were?
On the second appeal, yes.
OK, so it took 2 appeals. The other thing, of course, is that there was a World in Action programme which looked at this. Were you involved in that? Because that made a big difference.
It did make, but they did not contact me. Had they done so, I would have given them the information that at 2:05, 3 days afterwards, a group of coppers had told me the Serious Crime Squad had arrested the wrong people.
But, I mean, we've got the relatives of 21 people killed, 182 injured in that attack. Yeah. They, of course, are sitting there thinking, well, if the people who were arrested and did 17 years in prison for the death of our loved ones or the injury didn't do it, who did?
They were named at the new inquest that was held in Birmingham. Now, again, I applied to the Home Office to be allowed to give evidence, and I've never even had a thanks but no thanks.
So what you mean, they just ignored you?
Yeah. Now, when the Birmingham Six were released, there was an investigation into the conduct of the Serious Crime Squad. I was interviewed by 2 detectives from another part of the West Midlands force, and I confirmed that in the case of any members being charged for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, I'd be happy to give evidence on what I told them. Now, the case was set for Oxford Crown Court. Then at the last moment, the case was dropped.
Why?
We've never been told. Because my understanding is that I wasn't the only one who knew what was going on.
So what do you take from all this, Chris, as a sort of lesson from this whole process?
Well, ultimately, it's the senior civil servants in the Home Office who interfered in the affairs of West Midlands Police to try and get convictions at any cost to show that their pet project worked.
And what about lessons for journalists today? Because we don't really see much scrutiny. There's also, of course, a lot of terrorism going on, Chris, now. There has been since the 7/7 bombings. I mean, obviously, if something so horrendous can happen back in 1975 with this miscarriage of justice, what do you make of the current state of journalism and the criminal justice system with modern terrorism? Well,
if you're talking about the terrorism then, there was a tendency for big papers to believe what the police had told them. I mean, now the main papers in Birmingham were owned by Lord Iliff, who was they're now owned by the Mirror Group, or Reach as it's called. Now, until the Post and Mail was sold to somebody called Ralph Ingersoll, they always took the police line. Now, when Ralph Ingersoll bought the papers, he appointed Chris Oakley from the Liverpool papers to be the managing director and editor-in-chief. And Chris took a much different view, and you immediately saw that they were a lot more questioning about what the West Midlands police had been up to, which I might add didn't make him very popular. The big problem we got today is we haven't got half the staff necessary to cover courts. I mean, if you're going back, when I was a junior reporter, the Coventry Evening Telegraph had 100 journalists. I think it's got 12. Birmingham Post and Mail, and the Sunday Mercury and the Sports Argus, I think they had over 300 journalists. That's why they were damn good papers, because there wasn't. But they were far less willing to criticise the police, and I think a lot of the crime journalists were too closely involved in police social affairs. I mean, the the crime editor on the Birmingham Post regularly used to go to police booze-ups, which I think, there's a clear conflict of interest. But you're absolutely right.
Oh, hang on, because he could pick up some good stories there, maybe.
Well, if he did, that wasn't reflected in some of the copy he provided. He consistently suggested the Birmingham Six were guilty, or even worse, they knew who did it, when the police themselves knew who the 5 people were.
Is there going to be any justice, do you think, in the Birmingham Six case?
Well, you can't...
Well, sorry, I better rephrase that, hadn't I? Is there going to be any justice in the Birmingham Pub Bombings case, Chris?
Not while certain senior civil servants are still alive. You see, Sir Philip Knight, who died recently, he took all his secrets to the grave. It's very difficult to find anyone on the police side who was actually involved in that inquiry. I think the only one I can think of is Tommy Methven, who was then head of Special Branch.
And what about coverage of modern terrorism? I mean, this is the thing: is this is what we need to know: is that the criminal justice system is working, and that the media is impartially reporting these attacks rather than just telling the public everything the police want them to.
The media do not have the journalists to cover cases. If you go to every Crown Court in the country, that's in cities and counties and county towns, there are major cases happening there every week which are never reported, other than perhaps one paragraph on what the verdict was. There just simply aren't the staff. There's too many publishers have assumed that online was going to be a license to print money, when in fact just the opposite is true. Well, I mean, if all the newspapers stopped giving away online stories for next to nothing, and that means more people would buy newspapers. That means you'd have more staff available to actually cover these stories.
Now the police will say. The miscarriage of justice, 17 years in jail for 6 innocent men at the Birmingham Six, could never happen again, Chris.
And pigs might fly. The problem today is a lot of coppers, most senior officers do not come through the ranks. They've only had 2 years on the beat before they become, with a graduate intake, they have to do 2 years on the beat and they're given their stripes. Then they've got to do that for another 2 years before they get their first PIP. And they can't be sacked until they've reached inspector. So that means they're going to be there 5 years. A lot of these people do not know what's going on. They don't know how to speak to ordinary people. They don't know how to get the best out of witnesses. It's all. They're very good at to giving you the theory, but a lot of them are just not up to the job.
So, do you think that something like the Birmingham Six could happen again still? Yes, I think it could do, but it probably would not be with the Irish Republican side. The majority of people in Northern Ireland want the Good Friday Agreement to work. That was former Coventry Journal reporter Chris Youett talking about the 1974 stint he did reporting on the Birmingham Pub Bombings, where 182 were injured and 21 killed. In contrast to the bomb attack by the IRA the month after, in December 1974, here in Bristol, where only 2 were injured and none were killed. Obviously, the telephoned warnings being absolutely crucial.
You're listening to dialectradio.co.uk, your local community radio run by volunteers. Log on to our website at dialectradio.co.uk to find out more.